Hello, everybody. Welcome to Data Cube's Killer Questions. Today, I am here with Karen, and she's going to be answering my killer questions. But before I ask them to you, Karen, do you want to give a quick intro into who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I'm Professor Karen Elliott, employed, as you can see, University of Birmingham in the business school, heading up finance and fintech, and specifically focusing on financial inclusion with digital technologies.
Great, thank you, Karen. So a whole area there, I think we can all guess how it might involve big data and AI. But killer question number one, how does how does your job involve data and AI, and how has that evolved over the years?
Yeah, it's really at the center of it. So when I was in industry for almost 20 years in finance, testing systems, and ironically, done full circle and now testing machine learning and AI systems from a socio-technical perspective. So what does that mean? That means that when I came out of industry, I trained at Durham University in social sciences around the social implementation of policy across broad stakeholders and who has the power dynamics, etc. From a wiki problems and complex adaptive systems theoretical perspective, which I won't bore people with. And then later did a machine learning course at London School of Economics to bring the two sides together, because one of the first things we did looking around machine learning and AI is how do you determine trustworthiness from a social and a technical perspective, which are radically different, as you would imagine. And that's still my central theme, because you hear a lot of talk around, I don't trust the data or the technology to do this. So it's still one of those areas, because it's so hard to conceptualize what does trust look like from a social perspective, and then from a technical perspective, is that adequate enough? Because to explain on a technical perspective, it's about adequacy and accuracy of the model within acceptability terms that then becomes trustworthy. That's radically different from how humans develop and perceive trust. So that's where machine learning and AI play a role in everything that I do every day, from teaching students to giving keynotes to playing about with it and prodding it and seeing what we can do around the accuracy, and explaining AI into human terms is phenomenally difficult. So it's an ongoing issue.
A fascinating area, Karen, and that whole kind of inclusion, I'm sure, is something that resonates with lots of us and something that's not talked about enough.
Yeah.
So building on that, killer question number two, what do you see as the biggest challenges around related to data and AI over the next 12 months?
I think there is data missing, and I think that's the real problem. We have an abundance of data in well, I talk about financial services because that's where I focus. We have
Yeah.
lots of data. As we know, the open banking movement has meant that the banks have had to release their stronghold over our data about how we transact, and through APIs, that has been released to third parties who are then creating bespoke journeys and looking at near real-time data. What does that do? That allows lenders to see whether you're a weekend millionaire, like you blow all your money straight away, or whether you save, or how you budget and use your cash and where you spend it. That can be viewed. On the flip side of that, it's not everybody is in that data. So if we're thinking about the current focus from the FCA, who I work with and sit on their digital sandboxes, if you are what you call it in the digital divide, like I say, I focus on inclusion. How do we get that inclusive data? You're not necessarily included. You might not fill out the census, so you won't be registered. You might not trust local authorities to have your data and consent to using it, or you just might not feature at all because you reside on the periphery of the systems. The systems don't work with you. So it's looking at that, because if we tend to just focus on the data that we've got, we're automating inequalities because it's quite narrow. It doesn't include these use cases that are not the norm, for want of a better word, that are not like you and I, that have always banked, have always been accessible to financial services. And that's the cohort that the banks and fintechs focus on, because we can't get away from profit, right?
Yeah.
Businesses have to make profit. We're now in the era of juggling the old dichotomy between purposeful profit and how do we juggle that with our triple bottom line, because For example, if we are a fintech and we're starting up and then we want to scale, we're doing well, we're making profit, we want to scale, you have to make a certain level of profit. And also under the FCA rules, you have to demonstrate a certain level of capital to be licensed to operate. So there is a problem between doing good, which lots of fintechs and financial services do, and also how do we manage the profit situation, because we need to do that for our stakeholders and shareholders, etc., etc. But I think there is a real need to look at the elephant in the room, which is if you want to talk about financial inclusion, and fintech was always brought in as the panacea of it will drive financial inclusion. And yes, we have done phenomenal things. It is a lot better. We have got no code, low code options. But if you are not digitally connected, if you do not have a phone, if you can't afford a phone in the current economic crisis, then your data is not there. It is a gap, and it's a huge gap. And so how do we try and build around that? And I've been working with community-facing organizations, credit unions. We are a group in Kutu, who are tech companies that serve these sectors, to try and see if we can start to build that. So it's coming, but it's still a nascent area. And when that data is not included in looking across what are we doing to protect, you know, society, the economy, and the environment, of course, we have the UN directives, then we get this phenomenon of washing, which goes back to trust. If you reside in that digital divide, would you trust the systems to work in your best favor? And that's part of human trust. So the ability, the benevolence, the integrity of that system to work with your best interests at heart. From an ethical perspective, what should we and ought to do with that data? And I think these are still the big questions that we can only incrementally do better, because we have to create value. That's what we do. And to quote a fellow Rob Price, you know, measuring everything and calculating everything will not save people or the planet. It's creating value. That's all we know how to do, and particularly in the industry. But my push is we need to have a full understanding of people who are being refused by the system, who could be included. And that also includes people who've had live in the wrong postcode. So there's flags where the algorithms, we've seen this in terms of what's called the poverty premium, where if you live in a postcode that is categorized by the algorithm as a risk area, coming from a risk management background in finance, I understand that, then you necessarily pay more. So they're paying more than you and I for car insurance, health insurance, any type of insurance. And we recently held a conference on financial inclusion, and people like Moneyline and companies working in that area said 14.5 million people have less than £100 in savings, and 11.5 million people have cancelled their insurance this year because they just can't afford it. Food is more important. So when you think that there's a huge amount, huge percentage that is being underserved, is not being able to get access. And when we did some research with a charity, they were saying they were actually told the algorithm says no. It's kind of like a Little Britain situation for the audience who know Little Britain. And my drive is to look at, you know, how do we understand that, get this data into circulation, and then start to have a slightly different conversation, which is what the FCA are pushing at with consumer duty. But we're still just using the same data as far as I can see. There's not enough interaction in the peripheral, which leaves a huge research gap, which I found out also exists in the UK. There's lots of literature on emerging currencies, M-Pesa, what we're doing with SIM cards in India, Africa, Asia, etc., that has brought the community more included. There's still issues with that as well, but there is a way to do that. But we have more regulation for very good reasons in this country, and we need to keep looking at how do we balance these things that works in a responsible manner, so we don't irresponsibly lend to groups, but we also try and include them. And that's, again, an ongoing conversation around data and what does the resultant technologies look like if we do not have this diversification of thought up front. And I'm like, an example in universities, ethics by design is not regularly taught. It's taught in a handful of universities, but not all. So therefore, the developers that we're pushing out don't necessarily think from that perspective. They develop
Mm.
products according to the specification, but not according to the population that I'm serving is quite diverse. Are we having a diverse conversation? I mean, that's a grand simplification of what they
Yeah,
need to do, but it's a start to actually consider. And like
totally.
I say, there's one team that I know of in Warwick that is 50-50 male and female developers. And again, they come from all different countries. So you are getting that cultural difference, which needs
Yeah.
to be drawn on different experiences to actually go, well, that's not quite how it works in our culture, and we need to consider X, Y, and Z when we're trying to build something.
Yeah.
That is
It's a
one example.
fascinating area, Karen. And,
Yeah,
I'm sure we've all seen examples of people being locked out of things like when you go and pay for the parking, you can't pay by coins anymore. You need to pay by an app. I've seen so many people who, haven't got a phone with them or haven't got a smartphone, or going into a pub and needing to scan a QR code to access the menu and order things. And again, I've seen people, and I'm sure we've all experienced that. So people are already being locked out. And I remember
yeah,
the thing you said to me when we spoke a couple of weeks ago, Karen, around, you gave some great examples about how things are changing, but that most of our tools we're using are designed by wealthy, educated people in the
yeah.
Silicon Valleys of this world. And
Mhm.
therefore, it's not surprising that inclusion isn't front of mind.
No, I think that narrative is changing, but it doesn't change the tools that we're using now. They're already here. We're
Yeah.
already using them, and change always takes time because most people don't like change. It's painful for your brain to go through the changes, and like you say, it changes across demographics, and that's why we see the rise in scams. Because when you get the elderly demographic, I was talking to a company who've come up with a great solution, great use of AI yesterday, called Ask Silver. And what it is, it checks to see if, say, you get a suspicious email or text asking you for details, you can run it through this and it'll say, that is not the company. So say you got an email from Every saying there's a delivery, but first you've got to pay X amount in delivery charges. That can check and say that is not from Every.
Yeah.
And it happened to me recently. I was suspicious because I was looking at a new foldable phone, and then I got a phone call supposedly from EE to say, oh, we can offer you at a vastly discounted price because you're an existing customer, you've been with EE for several years, so you get this discount. When I could plainly see on the website it was £20 more a month for that particular phone. And
Mm,
I went, I'm not giving you any bank details. I'm
mm,
ending this call. I rang EE and confirmed it wasn't EE,
yeah.
but they still rang me back and said,
And
we
they're
are
good.
EE.
They're getting good and better,
We are
aren't
EE.
they?
We'll send you another email with a link.
Yeah.
And this is a conversation I had yesterday with Alex Somerville from Ask Silver, who his father lost his entire life savings through a scam. And
Mm,
this is what we need to take into consideration. Yes, we're doing phenomenal things to broaden payments, to bring people
mm,
in across reg tech, legal tech, ed tech, whatever tech you want to add on the end of it, taking the lead from fintech. But we still need that human in the loop, as I said before, because we don't know how to contain this. And having studied behavioral psychology as well at my time doing my PhD, there is this dark side of human psychology, which the criminals are always 5 steps ahead with the technology, that
yeah.
we can do this. And everybody knows it's not rocket science to tell people who are listening, those scams are getting more and more sophisticated. They
They
are
are.
having emails that have a suffix of EE rather than
Yeah.
it from Czechoslovakia or Russia or somewhere where you go, oh yeah, that's definitely a phishing
Mm,
email. So this is a problem for people over 65 as well,
yeah.
because they're
And
serving
and in
families.
our business, we're increasingly
Yeah,
getting people pretending to be me, contacting team
yeah,
members on WhatsApp and things like that. So yeah, it's
yeah,
prolific. Great, fascinating area. We could talk about that all day, Karen. But
yeah.
let me get on to my next killer
Yeah.
question. On the positive side, what do you see as the biggest opportunities regarding data and AI over the next 12 months?
Well, I think this is it. The counter around security and privacy. Like I say, Ask Silver is a great use of it. So it's actually checking. We have got AI checking AI now to tell you whether it's valid. And I think there's opportunities to use that to look at the hallucinations that we're seeing in ChatGPT, because it's here, as we spoke about last time, it's here, it's not going away. I liken it to when Wikipedia came out, particularly for academia, that human nature is going to use it. It's a shortcut. If you push for time, we are not rational when we're stressed. So we're going to go for the easy option to get things done. And I think the good use of AI, it's phenomenally brilliant at crunching data. So if you've got large data sets and you train the AI properly, like we're saying, have these ethical considerations in your mind. Who is your target audience? Where am I getting that data from? If I'm getting it from sources outside of my company, then we all need to think responsible. Like if I use this ChatGPT information or code or open source coding, do I know the heritage? Do I know the authenticity? And can I check that to make sure I'm not going to run into that? But I think I am an optimist, but I'm also a critical realist on the other side, that AI is here to stay. It's doing phenomenal things. No one person can keep a handle on what it's doing. I'm always surprised when people are coming up with new inventions. For instance, for dementia, the recent success of Substar with Jane Sibley. My mother's got dementia, one of the reasons I pushed for financial inclusion. And that is an app to let the carer not totally reduce the autonomy of the person with dementia. They can still spend, but you put a cap on it. So for example, my mom went on a run of buying toothbrushes and toilet rolls, and her flat was just full of them because she couldn't remember that she bought them. So she went out and bought some more and bought some more and bought some more. And therefore you can put a cap on what she spends, so they're not spending hundreds of pounds. I mean, if that being clothes or whatever, she might have been spending £200 a day, which is unsustainable. And this invention allows you to curb it. And also around gambling, we've seen phenomenal use cases with Professor Sharon Collard's team in Bristol, looking at how we can use the technology to help people reduce that addiction, not overspend, which has that splintering effect across your life to cause absolute chaos. So I am optimistic. There's lots of ways we can use the AI for good, and in finance as well. We're still looking at how can we broaden it? How can we simplify the T's and C's using AI? So some of our research assistants were recently involved in an FCA tech sprint, looking at, when you get the really long T's and C's now, according to GDPR, and you never read it. People just never read it. They click, I want to be on that website. So the human brain goes, what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah.
But it could be. So what their tool does using machine learning is pull up the salient points and give you, say, 5 top things you should really be aware of, which is brilliant, right? So that is a phenomenally good use case of what we're doing. So there is hope that there is, you can't say it's bad because it's not. But again, I go back to my point, starts and ends with humans. Humans decide what's in the data sets. Humans then take those data sets and decide what to tell the machine to look at once you've got the effort from the neural network, the deep learning part that we still can't fully explain because of the black box. But we, again, have these safeguardings in terms of levels of acceptability, which is a trustworthy part. And then we start to train it on unsupervised and supervised learning, ensure it's within these parameters, and then we can learn it to AI. So I think that I am optimistic that we will see good use of it, but I think we just need to wrap that little bit of caution that humans, it's artificial intelligence, and other people have said this, intelligence is slightly misleading. Because it's only as good, back to good old Ada Lovelace, garbage in, garbage out. It's only as good as the data and what you tell it and what you train it to look like. And it makes mistakes, train to look, this is a cat, this is a dog, but if you take the ears off the cat, it gets it wrong. And I reviewed a recent paper looking at how do we do credit scoring and feasibility for a person in finance using the human algorithm method and using ChatGPT. And ChatGPT was inaccurate in all of the calculations. Now, the implications of that are huge. So there is work to be done. And could it be that you wrap some AI around what you get out of ChatGPT to ensure that companies like yourself or others operating in the fintech space or supply chain to that are then safeguarding what they're doing? And then we've got all the compliance and regulations around sustainability to meet with that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a fascinating area. And I think, I think the developers in this world are comparing models and not accepting the answers as truth, right? And
Yeah,
asking different models different questions and getting different answers. But a lot of the population won't be doing that. They'll be asking ChatGPT a question, getting an answer, and taking that to be truth. So yeah, there's a
they
big education
automatically
thing here,
think
isn't it?
due diligence has been done by somebody,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that infinite somebody. But at the moment, we
Yeah.
don't have that infinite somebody. And like I say, things like Ask Silver are starting to fill those gaps for different demographics. But like I say, it's a multifaceted approach. I mean, there's lots of talk
Mm,
about running digital literacy courses and financial literacy courses.
mm,
But there's also a misconception that everybody who is not in the system is financially illiterate. And we found that not to be the case.
yeah.
Yes, it was maybe a small sample size, but you could say, well, because we don't have that data and we don't know, we can't generalize and say that this is not the case. I
Yeah.
think it's a mix. People have some abilities, and like you and I yourself, sometimes
Yeah.
even in the jobs that we do, we get in such a situation going, I'm not quite sure what I need to push here, or
Yeah.
my QR scanner is not work. Why is it not working?
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly. It's a fascinating area, Karen. And last question, because you're in such a fascinating space, I'm really excited to hear your answer. But if you could wave a magic wand in the world of data and AI, what would you make happen, or what would you wish for?
I think it ties to what I've said. I want people to collaborate more. We need data sharing. I mean, one of the big bugbears in academia, and I always say to students, is how do you get access to data? And because of GDPR, etc., companies are fearful of being sued for sharing that data in case they breach something like that. So we need to look at how do we allow academics access to this data that is compliant with privacy and security. It's always upmost in our minds to actually start to tackle these problems, but also the responsibility to go, there are gaps, and we can't just believe it's that. So I guess my wish is collaboration,
Yeah.
sharing, and not being afraid to ask the stupid questions,
Yeah.
wrapped up in deliberative leadership. So being able to say, I don't know, I
Yeah.
don't understand the technology, which I see in C-suites, just saying. But allowing your company and your employees to pick that up. I mean,
Yeah.
I will say to students, I don't know the answer to that. And they look
Mm,
at you and nobody can know everything.
no.
So why do we presume that we do? And just a
Mm,
little snippet to finish off. I was invited to a forum this week, and I left industry 20 years ago in my mid-30s. And the same problems are there when I was program manager: communication, collaboration, and leadership. Now, that's nothing to do with data or technology.
no.
And these are also missing, that we don't pay attention to that. It starts and ends with people. And a lot of the blockers, for example, at a digital conference recently, we're talking about cross-border ID. I'm going, technically, there aren't any borders anymore because it's digital. So these are human imposed borders for good
Yeah.
reasons. But we have to acknowledge that culture and change, as you said, people don't like change. Cultural change takes years. It
Mm,
it can't just change over months. And this is why we see it washing and things not being right, because we're trying to change too rapidly. And people have to look at the DNA of their company, what they're good at, not spread themselves too thin,
yeah.
and then ask the questions, which parts of those DNA can I change? It shouldn't be more than 5 elements, because then you get change fatigue.
Mm,
And really think about the responsibility. So there's a bit of a long
yeah.
answer, but I
No, no,
think you
that's
get the
great.
gist.
Thank you, Karen. Really appreciate it. I think the thing I'm walking away from here is, a real reinforcement of that inclusion and
Yeah,
how,
and
them
critical
in
thinking, taking the
really,
time to engage in critical thinking. That's a strap line to
yeah,
students. You get the question from students, what am I paying for? And I went, if I can walk out of that room and you question everything I've told you, I've done my job.
that's perfect. That's really fascinating. So yeah, inclusion and critical thinking are the things I'm walking away with. Thank you ever so much for answering my killer questions, Karen. Really appreciate your time.
No problem. Thanks for asking me. Thanks.
No
Bye.
worries.